Today we've got a great story of getting revenge on somebody who harasses someone's best friend. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, I caught my food thief in the best way possible. Easy way out, please don't steal. If you steal, it's on you. If you steal my stuff, you will regret it. Badly. I mean it with everything in me. You don't believe me? I think you should read the consequences of stealing from me. It's funny because I enjoy sharing a lot, but that's only if you ask or I feel like giving you. This isn't what the story's about though. Someone thought they were going to get away with stealing my food. Well, I got them back. It would have been fine if it was a mistake, except it continued for a long time, so I paid my food thief back in her coin. I work at a food blogging company, so that meant that there was always going to be food around. Everyone was always working with one meal or another, so if you didn't bring lunch, you could always find something around the office. I knew that, everyone knew that. The place I worked at was so generous that they provided catering at least twice a week. There were so many options that if you decided not to eat something you made, you still wouldn't starve. For people who didn't have to worry about allergies or food poisoning, lunch was an all-you-can-eat buffet. I am not so lucky though. I am allergic to most nuts, as well as eggs and bananas. One drop of any of those food items could send me to the hospital for days, and this meant that I had to be careful of anything I ate. That also meant that I had to be careful of cross-contamination at work. Anyone could have been cooking with the things I was allergic to and I wouldn't know. I took it seriously because anaphylactic shock was nothing to joke with. That meant that I had to make my lunch or I would starve. I lived alone, so I didn't have to worry about cross-contamination at home. That didn't stop me from being careful though. I also had to tell my coworkers about my allergies so they wouldn't offer me things that could likely kill me. Everyone respected that except Gray. This woman is annoying to say the least. For someone who worked with food, she refused to acknowledge my allergies. There were so many times that she would offer me a banana pudding and then claim that she was trying to prank me to see if I was really allergic. That made me uncomfortable, but I developed the habit of thoroughly checking what I ate and what I was offered. She sometimes did the same with eggs. There was a time she offered me French toast that had been soaked in eggs for a long time. In my head, I thought she was out to kill me. However, Gray knew how to dismiss things as jokes, so I did my best to stay away from her. Everyone had a bad habit, and Gray's was eating other people's food without their permission. Most people knew this, but they chose not to confront her because she respected no one and was very loud-mouthed. No one really liked Gray, and it was only a few people who stood up to her. She would take people's food and then say they weren't good enough. I thought mine was safe from her because she always criticized my food. She would loudly comment on how sad it was that I couldn't have eggs or peanut butter or Nutella. One time she even said it was sad that I couldn't have a banana smoothie. I didn't pay her attention because that was just classic Gray. So Gray's bad mouth was the reason I didn't suspect her when my food started disappearing from the fridge. I was looking forward to my lunch after a hectic morning. I had made myself a sandwich that had all my favorite things with a strawberry smoothie. It was finally time for lunch when I walked to the fridge. I was surprised to find my food missing, even though I was sure I left it in the fridge. I had labeled it as well. "This is Anna's food. Please don't touch it. I have allergies." I thought maybe I forgot where I kept it and started searching through the fridge. I looked for about 5 minutes before it dawned on me that my food had been stolen. I went back to my cubicle and asked if anyone had taken my sandwich by mistake. Everyone answered in the negative. I was down because I'd been looking forward to my lunch that day. My coworker and cubicle buddy John offered to make me another sandwich, promising to take extra care in avoiding all the things I was allergic to. He made me one and I had lunch that day. That didn't mean I had a good day. Someone had stolen my food despite what I'd written on the bag, and that irritated me. I thought that maybe my note wasn't clear enough. So the next day, I packed my lunch into a box and wrote an even bigger note, "Do not touch, this is Anna's." Except my lunch was stolen again. Now, I'm very non-confrontational, so I didn't get into arguments with anyone about my stolen food, but I was irritated. So for a while, I started keeping my food in another fridge. I eventually got tired of walking to another office and resumed putting my lunch in the fridge for my office. There are 8 of us in my office area, so we have a fridge to ourselves. For a few days, my lunch was fine, until they started going missing again. So I devised a plan to catch the food thief. It was an easy plan. I knew what everyone hated, so I began to add them to my meals. 2 of my coworkers couldn't stand anchovies, so I made a sandwich that had anchovies in them the first day. My lunch went missing. The next day I added capers and it went missing again. Not everyone can eat pork, so I made a ham sandwich and it was stolen. I almost gave up. Then, a few days after my last experiment, I snapped and ranted to John about how I was tired of getting my lunch stolen. He gave me an idea. He lent me his tiny camera and told me to hide it at the back of the fridge, directly behind my lunch, so I could see who'd been stealing my food. I came to the office very early and did exactly that. John and I had gone to film a restaurant special in the morning, so when we got back, I went to the fridge and as expected, my food was missing. I took the camera and plugged it into my computer. Imagine my shock when I saw Gray's magnified forehead in the camera. She'd been stealing my food. I was livid. Insulting my food choices and allergies wasn't enough. She was stealing the food she insulted me for? I was really angry and told John I was going to confront her when she got back. However, John told me to hold on. He had this very mischievous smile on his face that made me realize Gray wasn't going to like what happened to her. Nobody liked Gray in my office, so before I knew it, John had created a group chat without Gray to tell them what had been going on. What was supposed to be a confrontation had now become a full-blown operation. I couldn't control the thrill I felt. It was strange. Getting back at people wasn't always in my book. My coworkers immediately had big plans for how to embarrass Gray. I had my plans too, but I listened to them first. Someone suggested adding Carolina Reapers to brownies or even making coffee with black pepper. We all laughed at the thought of her running up and down the office looking for something to stop the burn. The tactics were devious enough to embarrass Gray, but that would only stop her from talking. I wanted it to be explosive, so I told my coworkers my plan. I continued to put my lunch in the fridge, as well as the camera that John had given me for about a week or so. I did this so I could have enough footage of Gray stealing my food. This was going to be my backup in case my plan failed. Gray continued to be her same loud-mouthed self in the office without knowing what was going on around her. She should have suspected something when I started eating during lunch breaks again. After everyone else in the office had agreed with my plan, I started bringing 2 bags of food to put in the fridge. You might be wondering why I was using my money to feed someone who wasn't even kind to me. The truth is, it felt satisfying to see someone who insulted my food choices resort to stealing them because they couldn't have enough. That meant I was a good cook. Call it twisted, but I felt a really wicked satisfaction because it was Gray that was stealing. As soon as I was sure I had enough footage of Gray picking up my food bag, smirking as she removed my notes, crumpled them and tossed them in the trash, I knew it was time to get back at her. She must have thought she covered her tracks by throwing the bag somewhere else rather than the office trash can. I saved the footage from the camera and printed a few screenshots from the footage before I left the office that day. John and I deliberately stayed late so we could print the pictures without Gray knowing. On the way back home, I stopped at the local CVS in my area and got laxatives. I asked the pharmacist for one that was enough to send whoever used it running around. I got a bottle of the one he recommended and headed home. I made white rice and chicken curry for lunch the next day and added as much of the crushed up laxatives in the rice after I packed it in a Tupperware. As usual, I packed up the special lunch for Gray and told my other coworkers that the operation was now in motion. I dropped the bag directly in front of the camera when I got to work and just went about my day. You could feel the anticipation in the room that day. When it was a few minutes before lunch break, John sent a message to the group chat and told everyone to find a way to leave without making Gray suspicious. We met outside the office. I connected the camera to my phone and watched as Gray took my food out of the fridge and threw the note on it away. We waited 30 minutes until we went back into the office. That meant the end of lunch break, so it seemed like we had gone to have lunch. I checked the fridge, and sure enough, my food was missing. The plan worked. I walked up to Gray and told her to never steal my food again. She immediately got defensive and rude. She said I was crazy to say that when my food was disgusting. I laughed when I told her that the laxative she just ate suggested otherwise. The shock on her face was immediately replaced by a look of discomfort as she ran to the bathroom. I don't think I'd ever feel as satisfied as I was that day. Watching Gray get up and run to the bathroom while threatening to sue me was the best thing that happened since she started stealing my food. We added the tag "food thief" to the screenshots from the camera and put it everywhere in the office. Good luck suing now. As for Gray, she had to stay home from work because she couldn't stop running to the bathroom. Like I said earlier, do not steal my food. So personally, I think the holy trinity of food thief revenge is going to be something like A. Cat food tuna sandwich, B. The Carolina Reapers, or C. The option OP took, laxatives. Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy crazy stories of revenge, why not hit those like and subscribe buttons down below? That said, our next story is, my cheating partner got a lifetime to reflect on what she did to me. The worst kind of hurt a person can go through is betrayal. Not just your ordinary betrayal. No, I'm talking betrayal that can be likened to someone you really trust and love, quite literally stabbing you in the back, after all that you had sacrificed for this person. My partner, female 26, and I, male 28, had been together for the longest time, and I never in a million years could have imagined that she would treat me in the way that she did. And the worst part of it all was the fact that she was not even in the slightest remorseful about her behavior, and the fact that she had been caught. This really did not allow for any room where she could concoct different dimensions of lies, and the only thing she could resort to was to use manipulation tactics, and in a way gaslighting me into believing that the whole situation was warranted. I spent a short time thinking about what exactly went wrong between us, what I did wrong, if at all there was anything that I could have done to make things better, and also if there was any way to fix things. And when I realized finally that at the end of the day she was not in the least concerned about the situation she'd put our relationship in, I decided that I wasn't going to further stress myself, as she was at that point in time no longer worth it. And so I decided to pay her back for her actions, ultimately to let her feel the consequences of her behavior, since she was of the idea that she was above consequences for the rest of her life. My partner and I met each other while we were both in college, some 4 years ago, and this was quite the fateful encounter, as neither one of us could have ever imagined that we both were going to ever come across one another. Well, not in this lifetime anyways. Quite frankly, we both loved in very different situations, and we've both been through completely different and opposite things. And even following this, we still both were dated to have met. This was way back in college. I was still a freshman at the time, and I was just getting to adapt to the new environment I'd found myself in at the time. I literally had no idea where my classes would be taking place, and this proves to be quite problematic for me. Well, for one, I'm not that good with directions, and I guess this is normal for people, but I get disoriented quickly when I come across a couple of buildings with similar paintwork, and this can quickly make me lose my sense of direction, and this has even cost me about 2 classes at that point. And I wasn't willing, nor was I ready to let it cost me another. I was determined to get to my classes on time, the very next day. And that was the day that I came across her, my partner. Well, for the story's sake, and for privacy reasons, let's call her Anna. Anna and I met while I was on my way to class, apparently in a hurry, and then I bumped into her. I couldn't have cared less about her when I bumped into her at that point in time, because I was seriously late for class at the time, and I was already determined not to miss that class by all possible means. And then that was when I took a quick glance at the person I just bumped into, and she possessed one of the rarest and most beautiful pairs of eyes I had ever seen. I was instantly captivated by her gaze. And I don't know when I stopped and came back to help her up, I instantly apologized for my actions and briefly explained to her my situation at the time. All she did was stare back at me, and that was all it took for me having lost every single bit of composure I had. I just stood there speechless as she accepted my apology, and I knew right then and there that I truly wanted to see her again, as I had no idea when I would be opportune to see her again, but I didn't even know how I was going to go about the whole thing. And then it came to me. I could use what had just happened to my advantage. And so I quickly extended my hands for a polite handshake as I introduced myself, and from there we made light conversation. And right as I was checking my time, I realized that the class had already started some 30 minutes ago. I knew that I had to go, and so I requested to get her number, as I'd like to properly apologize for what had just happened. And she went along with me, gave me her number, and even went as far as collecting mine. I would say that it was a complete success. My plan to get her number to stay in touch, and possibly see her again, that is. From that moment onwards, and for the rest of that day, she was all I could think about. I just couldn't get her out of my mind, and this was probably because of the way she looked at me, or the way I got entranced at first sight. I thought long and hard as to what exactly it was that I was going to tell her, or rather use as a conversation starter for our next meeting, because for sure I was definitely saved by the situation I found myself in the last time, and when nothing was coming to mind, I just opted for a call. And even though I placed a call on a whim, and I knew practically nothing as regards to what I was going to tell her, things still went smoothly, and I was able to get a meeting out of her. And this in my books is still a win, regardless of whether or not I was prepared for it. Anyways, fast forward a little, when things had already progressed quite a little bit between the both of us, as at the time, we were already a little bit fond of each other. In some sense, we were already close with each other, as she once even said that she found me quite interesting and she really wanted to get to know me. And this was not so etching that she usually does, as she doesn't relate well with people all that well. I was definitely down for that, as I also found her attractive right from the very moment I saw her. We would have unending conversations about ourselves, all in an attempt to just get to know each other more deeply and more intimately, and I feel like this was really good for our relationship at the time, to be honest. That was basically how we built a solid foundation for ourselves. Now this is where the interesting but comes in. So I never would have imagined or thought that she was way above my level. Not to downplay myself or anything, but my family wasn't so well off that they could have afforded to pay the entirety of my college fees. I had to resort to student loans after I'd applied for various scholarships and every single one of them didn't come through. And this was majorly my driving force to get the best grades possible and making the best out of my situation. Anna, on the other hand, was quite literally the opposite. Her parents were so well off with their various companies that one would never have imagined that their first daughter of such a wealthy family would be in such a situation where she needed to study and get a college degree in the country. Again, not to downplay the educational system, but then again, I usually thought that kids like her were the ones that you would mostly find in schools like Harvard and the likes. Anyways, that was basically that about our meeting. And then moving on a little bit further, right before we were both meant to graduate, she had suggested that we both got into a really serious relationship with each other, which seemed quite normal to me, but then the only thing I was worried about was our backgrounds. But she did her possible best to assure me that it wasn't going to be a problem for the both of us. And I truly believed her, as I knew her to be quite literally the most humble and self-respecting person I'd ever known, and this was a fact. And without further ado, we finally got into a relationship with each other, and things were smooth sailing from then on. She would visit my family's place on some breaks, and I would hers, even though those were nerve-wracking moments, but her folks seemed to like me quite well, especially her mother and surprisingly her father too, as we had quite a lot of interests in common. After a little more time in school, we both had graduated with the best grades possible, and we were now looking to start our lives together. I was happy and honestly ecstatic about this new chapter of my life with the one person I felt the safest with and I loved with all my heart. And I knew she felt the same way for me, or so I had thought at the time. Right as we graduated, her father got us a house to settle down in as a graduation gift to me and his daughter too, seeing as things were going to be progressing quite far with the both of us. We thought long and hard about our future together and whether or not it really was time to move in together with each other. And when we finally agreed, we did so without hesitation. And within the next few months after graduating, her father even offered me a job at one of his establishments, which really let me set my priorities straight. I knew from the way my life was going that I wanted to make the most out of it and live in the moment as much as possible. And so the next thing I did or thought of doing was to propose to her in an attempt to win her hand in marriage. And she accepted, which was one of the happiest moments of my life. And it was from that moment on that things started to go awry. So a few weeks after I had proposed, Anna and I had suspiciously grown a little distant from each other. She was silently beginning to change. And not in the most noticeable way, but subtly, and I could feel it. But I just thought it had to do with the upcoming changes we both were about to face. And so I decided not to make a big deal out of it. There were times where she would start acting out and lashing out for the littlest things, and I knew this wasn't her. I just didn't want to escalate things at the time. Then one day she left the house and didn't return for a while, to which I got seriously worried. She didn't give an explanation, she just up and left. And after pestering her to tell me what happened, she refused to speak, and I decided to find out for myself. I took to searching her phone one day while she was in the shower, and coincidentally a message came up which was from a certain someone she'd been meeting these past few days. I was just perplexed, to be honest. Short of words and nothing to say, I waited for her to explain herself, and she basically said that she was not going to shy away from the fact that she is unfaithful. She also said she didn't want to get married to me again, as she felt I would threaten her inheritance. I spent quite some time thinking as to why she would all of a sudden change so drastically at that too. I know I had never thought of doing something like that to her, but then when she made me know that she wasn't remorseful in the slightest, I was mad. I could only control myself when I thought of a way to get back at her, which was to threaten her inheritance, which I wasn't planning on doing before. And for this, I made sure she got married to me by involving her parents, who obviously took my side in this situation, seeing as they were quite fond of me. And just like I had planned, I had my wish fulfilled, and she had to get married to me after much persuasion from her parents. And within the next year, we were already unhappily married, as she knew I could take everything from her at a moment's notice. And this really messed with her real good. The feeling of not being able to do anything about your current situation, even though you can do quite a lot, is frustrating enough, and that's what I plan on subjecting her to for the rest of our dear lives together. This is actually pretty darn twisted. Unfaithful cheater or not, forcing somebody first of all into a marriage and then forcing them to stay because you can take their inheritance. I mean, how is that not extremely messed up? That said, our next story is lecturer harasses my best friend, so I get him arrested. Before I, 22-year-old female, even got to college, I had heard the stories. Most of them were from my older brothers and their friends. Some were from my friends' older siblings, but the stories were all the same. Getting through college was supposed to be through hard work and dedication, but that's not how it is in reality. You only pass and graduate if the professors see it fit. I mean, if they want you to. It may sound a bit weird to a lot of people reading this. In fact, a lot of people won't be able to relate. But in my country, corruption is the order of the day. The people are evil, and anyone with a bit of power over another will use that power to oppress. I've seen it in all structures of the country. The government, the police, the law, even the darn hospitals. So when my brother's friend told me about her ordeal in one of the country's most renowned colleges, I listened with open ears. Only the rich were spared of these horrors. I come from a wealthy family. My father had his hand in lots of businesses in different sectors, and he made a lot of money. When it was time for me to go to college, he wanted me to go off to a different country, United Kingdom or the United States. I had my pick of Ivy League schools. He was ready to sponsor me, but like my older brothers, I said no. I'd been in a private school all my life. This was my last chance to experience public school life and see what it was like socializing with people who weren't sons and daughters of business tycoons and wealthy politicians. Besides, my best friend, Olivia, 22-year-old female, was going to a public college. She'd been on scholarship in my high school the entire time, and it ended when she graduated. She was the only friend I had who was from the middle class level of society, and my best friend. I didn't want to be apart from her for 4 years. My parents tried to convince me to reconsider. Even my brothers tried. They said boys have it bad in college, but girls have it worse, especially for beautiful ladies. If a professor sets his eyes on either one of us and we don't give in to his demands, he could pull strings that'll make us stay in the school longer than we're supposed to. They said a lot, really. But being the stubborn girl I was, I told them I was going anyway. They all gave up eventually and let me go. But they asked me to call them if I ever had any trouble with anyone in college. But aside from stubborn, I was also proud. So from the first day, I already decided I wasn't going to call them. I wanted to prove that I could handle myself. Besides, I didn't believe that I was in any danger. We were just 2 girls out of thousands. What were the odds? And so we went off to college. We got an apartment off campus. As much as I wanted to experience the life of a public college, there was no way in heck that I was going to share my space with a bunch of strangers in university accommodation. Olivia was the only one I could tolerate, so we got an overpriced 2-bedroom apartment, 10 minutes away from campus. The entire apartment was the size of my bedroom back home, and it didn't have hot water, but at least I was away from home and finally free of my overprotective parents. Olivia and I had this list of things we were going to do when we finally left home. We planned on attending a lot of parties and making more friends. Well, that was my plan. Olivia was planning on studying the entire semester course outline in the first week. but I was planning on forcing her to do the former. Anyways, 2 weeks after resumption, we finally started attending classes. We were both studying business, so we went to classes together. The classes were pretty early. Some of the professors set their classes at unreasonable times, and staying off campus wasn't doing us any favors. One day, after staying up to watch the final episode of a series we'd been following for some time, we both woke up late for a morning lecture. We got ready and hurried to school, but the class had already started before we got in. The professors were strict. Most of them had this insane 5-minute rule where if you didn't get to class 5 minutes before the professor started, you wouldn't be allowed in. We had already exceeded the 5 minutes. The chances of us being allowed to attend the class were slim, but we still tried our luck. When we got to the hall, we both walked in, hoping the professor, Mr. Sam, 51-year-old male, would be too distracted with his teaching to notice us. But he wasn't. He stopped us as soon as we walked in. He was about to tell us to leave when he looked at Olivia. Shockingly, he told us both to have our seats. Throughout the class, I noticed that he was stealing glances at an oblivious Olivia who had her nose buried in her books. I knew something was up, so I decided to observe to see how things progressed. At the end of the lecture, the class stood up to leave. I packed my stuff and we started to walk out, but Mr. Sam stopped us. He asked to speak to Olivia for a moment, and I gave them some space. When they were done, she came back and we walked over to our next class. I asked her what he wanted, and she said he asked her to come to his office to discuss with him. It was weird, but I didn't think too much about it. At the end of our second class, I waited for Olivia in the cafeteria while she went to meet Mr. Sam. When she got back, I asked her how it went, and she told me something unexpected. She said he liked her and wanted to get to know her better. I was shocked. I mean, I know Olivia's really pretty and she gets the most attention from guys, so I'm not surprised that she's the first choice. I'm only surprised that a professor would call her up to his office to tell her he found her attractive. I mean, that was very inappropriate. She said she told him it was inappropriate, but he said he saw nothing wrong with it. And when she tried to decline his proposal, he told her to think about it. I was worried for her due to the stories I'd heard from my brothers, but she didn't think it was that serious, so she told me not to think too much about it. Besides, he didn't get her number and he probably has a lot of work to do, so chances are he'll forget about her before the next class. But he didn't. We had the course at the same time the next week, but this time we got to class early and got seated where he wouldn't see us immediately. But once he got to the class, he looked around for a moment till he laid eyes on Olivia. Then he started to teach. When we were done with the lecture, he asked her to see him in his office again. This time I wanted to step in and talk to him on her behalf, but she asked me not to, that she was going to handle it herself. She went with him to the office, but this time her face was more grim than the last time she went with him. I asked what happened and she narrated the entire thing to me. When she got there, he asked if she had considered his proposal, and she said she had, and she didn't think it would be a good idea for a professor and a student to have any sort of relationship that wasn't academic related. He said he wasn't worried as there wasn't anyone in college who could challenge him because he had friends in high places. Still, she said she wasn't comfortable with it. Mr. Sam got mad and told her she didn't have a choice because if she didn't do as he said, he could pull strings to make sure she stayed in the school 2 or even 3 years later than her peers. He was starting to get aggressive, so she decided to leave his office. But Mr. Sam tried to grab her wrist to pull her closer to him. She only escaped because she was close to the door. I was furious when I heard this. He has harassed my friend, and I didn't even want to think about what would have happened if the door was locked. Asking a student out was inappropriate enough, but he also harassed her. This was enough to take to the school's disciplinary board or something. But when we talked about it, we discovered that we didn't really have anything on him. Yeah, he asked her out, but he did it in his office, in private. That meant that there were no witnesses. If we were going to report him to someone, the only thing we had was our word. And being a respected professor in the college, I'm sure the word of 2 freshmen wasn't going to be enough. I wanted to call my parents, but that would mean admitting defeat. My overprotective dad would want me to withdraw and transfer to another school immediately, but I didn't want that, so I decided to handle it myself. First, we had to get proof. The only way we could do that was if Olivia went back in one more time. She almost ripped my head off when I suggested this, but I ensured that she wasn't going in without a plan. We got a panic button device online, and when it got delivered, we made sure it worked before carrying out our plan. The plan was pretty simple. She'll go in with her phone on record and get him to say incriminating things. And when he tries to get handsy, she'll press the panic button, and I'll knock and ask her to come with me to attend to some emergency. We carried out the plan the next day, and it worked like a charm. Mr. Sam had gotten a bit frustrated with Olivia's evasiveness, didn't hesitate to say how annoyed he was with her. He threatened her again if she didn't give him what he wanted, and a clever Olivia asked him what he wanted. He told her explicitly that he wanted to sleep with her. That was enough evidence already, and as expected, he tried to pull her to him just like the last time. She struggled with him for a moment before pressing the button. We needed that struggle to make sure that he couldn't deny his intentions. The alarm came as a notification on my phone. I quickly knocked on the door and barged in before he could invite me in. I told Olivia we had an emergency at home and pulled her with me before he could say anything. At first, we wanted to take the recording to the disciplinary board so they could do their job, but we remembered him saying he had friends in high places. If something went wrong and he didn't get punished, we would surely be expelled from school. So we decided to take it to the police instead. I called my brother for this part. He had friends in the force, so I gave him the evidence and they did their job. It took a few days, but Mr. Sam was finally arrested while teaching a class. The evidence was proved to the school before they had tried to back him up, and they got it. He was fired and they cut ties with him. Olivia's family is currently pressing charges, and it's looking like he's going to spend a very long time in jail. I hope that this happening and this coming out and going to court is going to somehow provide an avenue for people that clearly got affected by this guy to maybe come forward, or some of that stuff to be unearthed. And yeah, this guy should probably be in jail for a long time. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another crazy revenge story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.